Okay, call the meeting to order and we'll open it up for public comment.
I don't have anyone requesting to speak.
Okay, we'll close public comment and move on to item number 1, approval of the September 14th, 2022 minutes. Anybody have any additions, deletions, amendments? None?
So move.
I'll second. All those in favor of approve the September minutes, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, all those, so the ayes have it, and we'll approve those minutes. Moving on to the Luxair report. Steve, you there?
I'm not showing him as participating.
I don't see him either. Okay. Well, I guess we'll move on to my report, and I don't have anything. So the one thing that we have left is the item for discussion and or action. The airport visioning team general progress update. Is that you, Grant?
Yeah, I guess I'll start this off, Tim, and then I certainly would, Bob, I'm glad you're there. Your schedule changed. I didn't think you were going to be here tonight. So Bob and Mike will probably have the most formative color commentary that they can offer just as direct participants. But I would also just say Bonnie has been a regular observer of the first 3 sessions that we had. I'm going to go ahead. I want to share my screen. I just had some visuals that I wanted to use to bracket my commentary, and then we'll springboard over to Mike and Bob. So let me just figure out how to do that. Here we go. Perfect. Can you see the beginnings of a PowerPoint there?
As a side note, did everyone see the article in the Gazette Sunday airports? I thought it was pretty well done.
Yeah, just on that point, before we get into this, John, what were your takeaways from that article? I thought that was interesting.
I thought it was too, because they actually quoted his name escapes me, the guy from Iowa City that we had a good meeting with, and I thought they covered a lot of bases, plus Marion.
Yeah.
I'll give him credit. I thought it was a good article.
I was traveling and literally just got back. I mean, literally just got back just a few minutes ago. So I missed it. In a nutshell, it was just what was it, I guess?
It covered several airports and the overall community benefit of airports and how many jobs and type of revenue generated. And it went all the way from Cedar Rapids to Iowa City. It covered Marion and one other airport, I believe. So I think Marion was somewhere around $3 million or something, if I remember right. Yeah. Total benefit to the community. So yeah, it was. I thought it was well written.
Okay, I'll go ahead and just introduce this. So what we wanted to do here is just give a recap of the activity over the first 3 airport visioning team meetings that we've had. And it, one of the things that is, I would just say it's been a formative effort, because there's been a lot of emergent quality dialogue by the participants, which include Mike and Bob, as well as others. But so what I want to just briefly highlight, and then, as I said, let Mike and Bob sort of give some color commentary and some additional perspectives that they may have. I want to just sort of show you where we've been, and also to share with you an overview of select municipal airport budgets that we took a brief look at, and then provide a little emphasis relative to what our next meeting and its focus is going to be. And certainly, if I've interpreted that wrong from our proceedings last week, you know, we can calibrate our effort as we move forward. So we've had 3 meetings, one in October, one in the middle of November, and then the one last week. And in meeting number 1 and meeting number 2 is shown on this chart, was basically just a generalized level set and situational awareness to get the team all generally oriented around what our current state is, what some of the concerns are, what some of the recent history has been. And you can see that we had some discussion in the first meeting, just brief history recap, the initial planning efforts, which are principally represented by the ALP. Also then talked about the physical and environmental constraints that face us in the geography around the airport. Talked about some of the financial constraints that have existed and how some of those have then been subsequently resolved in the current lease agreement that we developed with Luxair. And the inputs to that meeting were principally the ALP as well as the HDR report from, I think it was last summer. The second meeting was a continuation of that same theme on situational awareness. And it was then moved to a compare and contrast of the HDR current state assessment, the recommended build out that was defined in that document, and comparing that to one of the initial build out states that were defined in the ALP. And interestingly, I think it was the first bus stop that was defined in the ALP is to get our runway to 4,000 feet, and that was the recommendation also that came out of the more recent HDR report. There was some good discussion amongst the team members, and very quickly it sort of distilled down into a budget related discussion. And the direction that came from that meeting from the team was to have a tighter focus on airport economics and budget. And with, I think, then the intent to really understand the viability of a municipal airport. And as I think I have mentioned to this group before, the current state that we have is not optimal for either Luxair or the city because of the constraints of funding utilization that we have, as well as the taxation environment that Luxair operates under. And right now it's unsatisfying. The question is, can it be satisfying under a different model? So that's what we have to assess. Last week, we took a quick look at multiple airport budgets. Some of them were maybe a year or two old, but they still structurally are representative of what's inclusive in an airport budget. And we didn't spend a lot of time on it, but the Ankeny budget, the Ankeny regional was put in there. and partly just because they're operating at a from a very sophisticated governance structure with an airport authority, which provides them then as a counterbalance to most of these other budgets. It gives them a source of tax revenue that is managed by the airport authority. Airport authorities are one of the governance models that are defined in the Iowa Code. So what this leaves us with, we didn't have an example or a prototype for Marion developed yet. So that is going to be the focus of our meeting. We're proposing to meet on Wednesday, January 25th. And with that, to have a hypothetical Charlie 17 budget built up, assuming a municipal ownership. And what we're doing to prepare that is to select data inputs derived from the various airports and Charlie 17 if it is available. This chart was just a summation of airport characteristics and budget comparisons for the airports that I just mentioned. Took a look at each airport based on the information out on SkyVector, as well as the budget sheets that were provided for each one. We just cataloged the based aircraft. I know those numbers jump around a bit. I'm not sure how current SkyVector is, but I just wanted to use an equivalent information base. Also, from SkyVector, the operations for the various categories you can see there. And I think that supports, I think one of Steve's commentaries to the team, that they are pressing up against a fair number of local operations, somewhere in the 12 to 15,000 range. And then it's a comparison of their runways that they have, as well as then any principal service options that they have: fuel, airframe, engine repair, transient storage. But at a high level, the important thing was to just take a look at what was being reported in their budget workups relative to their anticipated revenues and expenses, as well as to highlight any unique sources of income or expense. So for example, Esterville, at least in the budget that was examined, they were looking at a $10,000 profit. And in what includes or helps drive that is $72,000 worth of farm income. And there are variations to this. I'll just say, if you look at the very last entry on this depiction, Washington, there's a note there that they were budgeting for $300,000 worth of fuel sales. And I guess, I don't know that we were real clear as to why there would be that level of fuel sales. Maybe all you all have a sense as to what drives that. I don't know if they've got, they do have some military operations in there. And it looks like they have a fair number of itinerant operations. So maybe that's the sourcing for that level of fuel sales. So it's against this kind of information that what we have to do is really derive a financial pro forma as we would anticipate it to be representative of a fully municipal airport supported by an FBO, and to make reasonable assumptions as to what the inputs to that budget would be. And it's going to be, I think that's the primary test to, is really as the point to bring us then to consider other more broad-based considerations, such as community economic benefit, which was cited in the newspaper article, the $3 million. What else can we do or anticipate that might help us exceed $3 million? So this is the first determining gate, as it were, in order to propel our other decisions. And just to highlight again, the next AVT meeting is going to end up being here at the 25th of January. So Mike, Bob, I undoubtedly left some gaps in all of that, but I did just want to have a quick rundown of at a high level what we've been working on.
Mike, you want to go ahead?
If you could give me about 2 minutes, I'll go ahead, because I had to reposition myself.
Okay. I don't have a lot to add. Grant, you did a good job of framing it up. Essentially, the first 2 meetings, we were trying to get the rest of the participants kind of up to speed on where we have been and where you guys have been for the last almost 10 years. And so just getting them up to speed on what's occurred, kind of fill them in on some terms that they might not be familiar with and different things. This last meeting, obviously, we talked a lot about budget. We need to understand, what does it cost to run this airport? We don't know. We've made some assumptions. Jerry's provided us some information. We do not have all of the information from Luxair. Those figures we're going to have to make, again, reasonable assumptions on what costs are out there. So get our arms around what does it really cost to operate an airport, and then what does the model looking forward look like? Are we going to go to an authority that has some taxation options? Are we going to go to like an airport commission like Iowa City and have an operator there? What is an operator? What would somebody want to pay us to take on that role, or what costs would be shared? So really, it's just a matter of a lot of fact finding right now is what we're doing, and we're going to be, I think, leaning on Jerry to help fill in some of the gaps, because even with the budgets we got, there's some assumptions we have to make because we're not there. Mike, you there?
I think so.
Okay. I don't have much more to add to that. Again, just more, we're really in the fact-finding position right now. And as Grant alluded, Bonnie has been to every meeting, and she's been helping to provide some more context and to the history. And Frank being on the committee too also helps with some of that history. That's really all I have.
Yeah. But I'm, as you can see, I repositioned myself down to Florida. No, I was a little out of position, so I did get here. The comment, I'm getting reverb back. Is that me or is that somebody else?
You look like you're
I believe it's you.
twice.
No,
But
is
you
that
don't
any
get
better?
connected
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's a little
twice.
bit. I had to switch devices here. I think the conversation's been very good and on track. I think that comes down, our discussions are, in order to help us focus, we're looking at the budgetary aspects of what the construction or relationship is between both the city and the FBO, and the city, FBO, and the properties, as far as who's going to own, who would own what, and under what would that generate as far as property taxes, or what would that cost as far as lost property taxes? What would it mean if we go down the lines of I mean, all the options are being looked at as a budgetary issue, and it's helping to define what kind of activities the city wants to have as part of a budget, and what kind of activities the city does not want to have as far as maintaining an airport. What type of things the city does not want to, or would rather not put resources towards helping maintain or the operation of, and what things will they. there's several different scenarios. The current one of city-owned runway, rest of the airport owned by a private entity. What would it be as property taxes if it was city owned all the property? What would it be if the city sold the runway to a private owner? And what would the relationship be as far as both the operational elements of a budget and the capital projects development of the budget? The discussions have kind of focused on a lot of the report that came out as far as what are the projections as far as where will the airport be as far as classifications of aircraft on the current trend. And I think there's some I won't say argument, I'll say disagreement as far as what the projections were in the report, as far as what they're actually seeing. But it gets down to basically, if I have my categories right, and you guys correct me, I think a B2 or a C2 classifications. Basically, if you follow the projections, it will build up to a B2 and the capability to handle that type of aircraft. But at this time, we do know that there are King Airs that are landing at the airport, and that would be more of a C2. So at some point, there'll need to be the discussion of, are we building towards the projections, or are we going to be more of a, if we build it, they will come type of understanding, all given the limitations that we have out there as far as property acquisitions, length of runway. Our city council member who was in the insurance business is trying to track down these comments about the insurance coverages. Insurances won't cover if they land at under a 5,000 foot runway, and he hasn't been able to track that down yet. It may be that those are the characteristics that the manufacturer puts on the aircraft, and it's not the insurance company, but the insurance company probably would have some clause as, must be operated in accordance with manufacturer's guidance, and therefore now the 5,000 or whatever distance comes into play. So that's just my speculation on that last part as far as how the 5,000 gets roped in here, but we're still trying to track that down. So we just know what game we're playing. But it's coming down to, well, not coming down to, it's developing into an analysis of the budget options, the plus and minus on property taxes lost or gained on certain arrangements, and what can be maintained as far as the available property that's out there, whether it be a city-owned or privately owned. So if I got off track on any of that, Grant or Bob, let me know.
Mike, well, both you guys filled in quite a few gaps that I didn't mention. And maybe just to highlight, Randy Sterned has I think he's had multiple calls into different people at the AOPA, as well as some insurance underwriters that he has connections with. And as Mike said, he hasn't discovered anything definitive or conclusive relative to insurance limitations or requirements relative to aircraft operations versus runway length. It'll be helpful if at such point in time he can get that definition, because that's an important consideration for us. And Mike, you were accurate in terms of the scenarios that we need to analyze for. It's pretty much understanding the budget, the financial pro forma for current state, have it all be municipal, and what does that mean and to us, and then have a situation where it would be all private, and each one of those scenarios has its own relative set of pros and cons. But really the encouragement from the team members has been, we've got to take a reasonably data-driven perspective on this in order to lead our decision making. And so we're going to be real hopeful that Jerry Cyril can help us on this. And then as we look at longer term budget impacts on the city's budget, we're going to have, the city has an existing consulting relationship with a firm called D.A. Davidson. If you ever listen in on council meetings every once in a while, Michael Maloney from D.A. Davidson presents, and they are doing some deep analysis relative to all of the intricacies of bonding, financial allocations. What does it look like year in and year out in terms of that income flow relative to the needs of the projected city budgets? So we're going to be also dependent on that analysis. So I guess for Phil or Tim or anybody else, any questions that you might have for us?
I just had one, and that was, are those airports, all of those airports listed, are they private?
No, these, Phil, a majority of these, actually all of these are municipal.
Okay, thank you. I suspected so.
There might be, I should just qualify that. There might be one of them in there that's kind of in a same arrangement as us, but I think they are principally all munis.
Yeah, and one of the, when the list came out with the economic impact and where Marion fell with our comparable airports, the size of those communities, as I was corrected by the city manager, Marion's approaching what, 45,000 population. And you look at those other communities that were up against that, if any of them hit 10, I would be surprised. So it's kind of like, why we kind of know why Marion is where it's at, but what are the opportunities for the Marion Airport to serve a community of 45,000? What are the needs, both as far as resident traffic, commercial traffic, corporate traffic, and where are the needs going to be? And that's when we get into, do we look at the projections and trend line the projections, or do we get into the, if we build it, they will come? Well, you have to have a little bit of hope that, or understanding that there is a pent up demand out there and everybody's still not going to go to Cedar Rapids. And the fact that we're not available under the current legislation for NIPIAS funding is kind of a downer, and puts us at a disadvantage. But by going through the budgetary workup on the different scenarios, certain things will become more clear. When you start out and simply think at, okay, who plows the snow? I mean, if becomes a city-owned airport, is the FBO going to plow the snow, or is the city going to plow the snow? Who's going to mow the lawns? If FBO or the city? I know, and I think that there's certain sentiments on the city manager is public services has enough work to do. Let's not pull on anything more we have to do, but those are all costs that have to be assigned to one of the entities, and that will build the budget and see what the expenses are for the municipality and for the private operator. So at that point, the city will have to make a decision as far as how much support for a airport amenity they are willing to give, and how much capital projects or improvements funding will be available. Obviously, there's a little bit of grant funds available if the runway remains as a public entity, as we learned with the last grant we got. So what happens if it isn't, if it is no longer a public entity? What happens with the capital projects build out? Where are those funds going to come from? And Grant mentioned the airport authority. That's still a taxation upon the residents of the community. It just comes as a different flavor, but it's still a tax that is coming on their property taxes, and it's whatever you want to call it, it still increases taxes in some way or another. So what is the willingness to do that type of operation or taxation under the authority? So, but the first thing everybody wants to know are, what are the numbers going to be? What are we really talking about as far as numbers? If you were to go with city funding or funding under an authority, what are we really talking about? What needs to be funded to support an airport amenity of what level of service? So that's where we're progressing.
Grant, this is John. The only question I had is, you're hoping to get some kind of report by June or somewhere in that time frame, hopefully.
John, the target really, at least for this, to get through some of this financial consideration, this is sort of the decision gate, really. I think that there's a desire from some of my council colleagues. Randy, I see you're on the Zoom, but to get to that conclusion in the March or April timeframe. And part of the driving force to that is we are currently in a 1 year, I'm going to call it a quiet period, where neither Luxair nor the city can exercise an exit from the lease agreement that currently exists. And that quiet period ends on or about April 7th. So it's our desire to get through this financial soak cycle and come to a general conclusion so that we can, as needed, have enhanced discussions with Luxair as to what we're going to do. And they have a curiosity as to whether or not it would result in a purchase, or if it would result in just continuation of the lease through its current term, which is, I think, June of 2025. And so from a business perspective, they are just nearing, they need to have some enhanced certainty as to what they're going to be facing. So for all parties involved here, it really is important to try to come to some general conclusion in that time frame. As I say, March, but certainly in the April time frame. Randy, did I tell any major fibs there, or were they all minor? So that's anyway. That's kind of the driving force to propel us through this first decision gate.
Okay.
A lot of
great.
other things can go downstream from that, but this is the principal one, at least as I see it.
Okay, thanks. That's all good info. Appreciate it.
Other questions or comments? Anybody, please.
Has anyone, whether the city council or the Luxair, expressed pulling away from either agreement. I mean, you know, that topic seems to come up each time, and I was just curious if either one is anxious to close or dispose of any lease agreements.
Well, Phil, I guess I'll answer it based on the general understanding I have. And hopefully I've said this before. I don't know that it's an optimum business structure for Luxair at this point, just because of the fact that the county considers all of their owned airport property as commercial, and so therefore the taxation is you know, really acts on them in a negative way. And comparative in a comparison fashion, all these other airports that we've taken a look at, you know, as municipalities, as a municipally owned enterprise, they don't face those same kind of headwinds. So I would just say, and there's not anything that we can really do effectively to alleviate that burden for Luxair. You know, from our standpoint, the city, and I would, you know, Mike, I see you're out there, so chime in, because you see it as you've been managing this over the last few years. But it, you know, right now, the airport constitutes nothing but an expense. And you know, in our perfect world, it would be nice if we could have a business structure, an ownership structure that would permit us to be in a cost neutral or close to cost neutral position. And so that's part of, as Mike outlined, the scenarios that we have to look at. We have to see if we don't have a viable pathway to achieve a cost neutrality or close to it, you know, year in and year out. But one of the prejudicial factors that we have before us is we don't have a bunch of farmland around the airport. And so therefore we don't have any opportunity for a farm income to offset some of the operating costs. So we have to be a little more discerning as we go through these various scenarios. Did that help, Phil?
Yes, it did. Thank you very much, Grant. That seems to make a lot of sense.
Grant, does it appear that Mr. Waller has his hand up?
You are correct, sir. I was just going to add on to it that as it relates to the agreements that we recently negotiated with Luxair, and as they, you know, the question about pulling out, as part of that updated FBO agreement, we asked for a longer period of time to get to that out. So we got a year from when it was executed. I think it was April 7th. So that allows us to do this due diligence that Grant has been talking about, gives us that year to understand it. And then what the old agreement contemplated was it was a 30-day out provision. So we no longer have that. After the year, I believe it's either 60 or 90 days. So it allows the city, specifically the city council and all the laws that we have to follow when publishing meetings and whatnot, it gives us a little bit more time to respond accordingly. But we've been upfront and transparent with Luxair that this is the effort that we're going through. Han and I had some email exchanges a couple of weeks ago, and just we were asking for the budget in that just emphasize that this is the process we're going through and we're trying to get clarity. So we've got that time built into the lease agreements, and so they'll if there's a point where it became necessary to exit, that at least both parties have got a lot more time than they otherwise would have had under the previous agreement.
Hey, Ryan, Grant here. I think we also built into this revised, restated lease agreement, we also have a right of last refusal. Isn't that true, or am I?
Right, a first refusal, meaning that if they were to sell it, that the city has the opportunity to make the first offer. We're first in line.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And in the original lease agreement, I don't think that existed. So we wanted to protect as much as we could to give us breathing room.
So I have something. I raised my hand. I didn't know I could do that, but with all the discussion that we've had, I'd like to hear any input from those members that were on the original airport committee and the discussions they had. I'm sure we're hitting some of the same thoughts that went on during that committee, and anything that you can add, any of all those members or people that are aware of that content towards what we just discussed and what was discussed then would be greatly appreciated. Or any other discussion from committee members. But when the original committee was enforced and looking at the original purchase of the runway only, are anything we're talking about familiar, or is there anything we're missing, or anything in that regard? Tim, you got anything?
So we weren't here when the purchase of the airport happened, and how it was parsed out was already completed by the time our committee took effect. There were several talks. Juan was heavily involved in all of those, and we looked at different options to realign the airport, to move the airport. And basically what it boiled down to is that financially it made sense to stay right where we were because we had some infrastructure already there, and a location that was at the time extremely busy. One thing I would say about all of this is that I understand that it takes time to figure out exactly what the city wants to do. But there's a lot of eyes watching, and the momentum that was there when I first took over is going away quickly. And the feeling that I get is that there's some angst out there as far as what the direction the city is going to take going forward, and without having any kind of definitive arrangement, the longer that takes seems to drive more of the energy away. So I know that one of the airports that was listed on there was Perry, Iowa, and I knew the operator. It was Jonathan Walter. He ran that airport and he ran the Independence Airport very successfully until COVID came along. He built the Perry Airport up very successfully. He was adding more pieces of equipment. In fact, he had a charter service out of there with a King Air. Then COVID came along and kind of wiped him out. But I think some of this comes down to, and I don't know what kind of arrangements he had with the city, but your operator makes a lot of difference. So I think, some of the things that you're talking about farmland and where's the money going to come from? A lot of it depends on who's involved and who's going to be the one that's throwing the switches and who's going to be the one that's going to be there and drive actual business. So I guess that's my one comment.
Tim, I do agree with that. After visiting with the folks down in Iowa City, I mean, that operator down there's got it going on, and they're figuring out ways to bring in more revenue and make it more successful, because it helps their cause and it helps the city's cause at the same time. And that's certainly something we need. And I think that's something else that we're going to be asking Jerry for us to help us with. What are the possibilities? What might somebody want to do to get their skin in the game and get in bed with us? I think that's a big part of it.
I think if you remember the spreadsheet that was just up there and the line that had the business revenue, et cetera, in the grouping of communities that Marion was listed in, Marion's was the only line that was empty because that information was not forthcoming, so that we could include that. It wasn't obvious in the state report. So to some degree, we're flying blind as far as what's going on. No pun intended. As far as what are the current financial status or revenues of the current FBO. So for whatever reason, that information is not available to the city or the committee or the visiting team.
For clarification, is the taxation going totally to the county, and that, do I understand that Marion does not benefit from any of the taxation, or we do not derive any income from taxation from the FBO?
Ryan, you want to do that one, or I can handle that one?
We are a taxing entity, so we would receive property taxes from them, but with the FBO, we're basically rebating them back a large portion of the property taxes that they pay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, my 2 cents is, as when I was administrative services director for the board, people write, it's a terrible PR issue the county has, because everybody writes their check to the county treasurer, but only about 40% of that goes to, only about 18% of that went to the county for operations. About 40 some goes to each municipality, and the other 40 goes to each school district. So terrible PR to have everybody write their check to the Lynn County treasurer, but the county does not keep all the money.
Just one more comment. That's a hypothesis on the amount of fuel dispensed at the airport. I'm wondering if that isn't due from jet helicopter operations. Be interesting to find out if that's the case, or whether some jet aircraft have actually flown in to refuel. That's all I have. Thank you.
Well, Phil, just that's, fuel revenue is a component that we need to analyze for. And so we have to make some reasonable assumptions about perhaps the experience of others and how that maps then into the complement of aircraft that we're seeing operationally, and the types too. So that's one of the devils that comprise the details.
Okay, anybody else? Or,
All I was going to mention is the article in the paper mentioned a lot. We service a lot of crop dusters. I think they don't use 100 rows, they use fuel. Anyway, that was quite, it didn't mention the number, but it said there was quite a service for crop dusters out there as well. Other than that, nope, I'm done.
all right. If nobody has any other comments, let's adjourn. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Good Christmas.
Merry Christmas all.
Yes,
Merry
Merry Christmas.
And a happy new year.